All right, well, let's bring up some managers for a little panel and some more closing thoughts. So Jerry Ingersoll, Forest Supervisor on the Siuslaw National Forest. Jody Kaiko, Fish and Wildlife Service Forest Resources Division Manager. She's supervisor of the Level 1 teams, just to give you a little bit of context. Lee Folliard, he's the branch chief for Forest Resources and Special Status Species with the BLM. And Ken Phippen. Phippen? I want to make sure I say that right. Phippen?
Yeah, you got it first.
Phippen. The Oregon Coast branch chief for NOAA. So why don't you guys have a seat? Yeah, what the heck. Take a load off. And I've asked them each just to say a few words about what it's like to do management in the face of uncertainty, in the face of those guys who come sit down and want to have coffee and beer with them on a daily basis. So, Jerry, why don't you go first?
All right, so answers, what does it all mean? We got to the end of the day, here at the intersection between science and policy. You know, I always go into these scientific fora kind of with the hope that this time the scientists are going to give us all the answers and we're all going to take it and ride off from there. And yet it doesn't really work that way in the real world. The world is full of that uncertainty. If this were easy, anybody could do it. You know, speaking on the Siuslaw National Forest, or on the Forest Service as a whole, our mission is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. Narrowing it down to the particular areas we're talking about today, it's to recover the populations of threatened and endangered species, particularly in riparian areas, fish and other aquatic species. And we're here talking about riparian reserves, those areas that were set aside in the Northwest Forest Plan to be managed to sustain and restore the health of riparian conditions and all those things that are associated with them. So in a way, this is an exciting thing. We're not talking about that old trade-off between lands that are going to be set aside and protected versus lands that are going to be exploited or managed. Those decisions, once we're in the riparian reserves, are already made. These are lands that we want to protect, that we want to restore. That's a different model, a different way than we used to think. Thinking about, not about production, but about restoration. What do we do? And yet, that also is a humbling experience. It leads us to the place of what do we do? We want to restore the health of systems with the humility that's brought from the years of uncertainty. Shall we, in altered landscapes, in places where we've messed with things and now we want to bring them back to health. Is it better to take action, to remove the dikes and dams and rebuild stream channels? Is it better to restore diverse, multi-layered canopies? Is it better to let nature take its own route? It depends. We got long-term, short-term trade-offs between impacts we create now, impacts that we're shooting for in the future. We've got whole watersheds, and we haven't talked much about this today, in which we have a mix of ownerships and management regimes and different contributors to the health of those systems. We've got questions of what are appropriate reference conditions? What are we shooting for? What do we want to achieve on these lands? And multiple objectives, whether it's carbon sequestration or fish recovery. These aren't simple questions, and they don't have simple answers. So what then do we do? You know, personally, I'm guided by a couple of principles here. And one is the question of historic range of variability. Keeping all the cogs and wheels. If we can manage for things that occurred before we started messing with it, if we can put things back on a trajectory that's within the range of what it used to operate under, you know, that provides a degree of resilience, a degree of sustainability and assurance. And secondly, engaging communities, engaging the community of science, us here today, and engaging the larger communities, working with our partners and with the communities in which we inhabit to try to achieve these goals together. That even enters into the realm of politics and social science. With that goal in mind, that these are the riparian reserves, our goal is to restore them for healthy, functioning riparian systems. I always enjoy the dialogue and the discussion of the scientists, and I want to thank everybody who's been up here today because you've been educating me. And anyway, that's my summary. Jody.
Wow, what you said. That was great, really. And I appreciate the opportunity today, and thank everybody for sticking around. It's been a long day, and we've learned a lot about all the good science that's going on out there, a lot of good research, and new tools available to help us in informing these land management decisions. But as Jerry mentioned, you know, the science isn't necessarily going to give us all the right answers to move forward in making these decisions. And appreciate Stan's kind of opening presentation to this uncertainty and thinking about truly the science and the practice and the people and how it all kind of comes together. That really is a whole aspect to what we're dealing with. It's not just the science, it's just not the practice of what is being implemented on the ground. It's how it's all coming together and working in collaboration with the land management agencies and other folks within the communities to make sure that we're all reaching our desired goals and objectives. Though they may be different at times, I think ultimately the goals are these healthy riparian systems. But where there certainly is a range of uncertainties, there can be a range of biological outcomes. And while this is very much a complex issue with no black and white answers, we should strive to ensure that the best science is being applied. And very much what I've heard here today is that, again, there's a lot of good research going on. We do have good tools available to implement these projects and get these things on the ground as we all would like to see them. But of course, there are risks involved with both action and inaction, and risk tolerance varies very much among individuals, those on the level 1 teams, and certainly within agencies as well. There's a lot of you know, various agency cultures and whatnot, and actually, you know, how much tolerance we're willing to take on and how much risk we're going to take on. And certainly when we're talking about kind of in an Endangered Species Act context, that risk becomes even more paramount, and we have to be very cautious in our approach. But at the same time, as we heard today, inaction doesn't necessarily mean a positive effect, a positive benefit out there on the landscape. But certainly when we're dealing with these declining imperiled species, we do have to be cautious, but recognizing, and I did appreciate someone who, I think it was Stan, who said we've come a long way in forest management and forest health than where we were 20 years ago. And so in that respect, you know, we're beginning to see these changes. Again, it's difficult with some of these declining species that continue to decline, but recognizing that we're learning more as we go, and hopefully we're monitoring. That's an aspect that we really certainly need to incorporate into these project designs, solid monitoring, working kind of in an adaptive management context to make sure that we are having the desired effects that we hope to on the ground. But that monitoring element is key, because certainly we recognize there is oftentimes these short-term impacts, which we hope will result in long-term gains, but we have to ensure that that monitoring is being done so that we can emphatically say that, yes, you know, we are just achieving the desired results that we hope to. And so that's difficult, as was mentioned earlier today as well, in terms of declining budgets and whatnot, but that monitoring is really an important element in terms of making sure that the prey species are being sustained, that we are ultimately having a functioning ecosystem out there for everything that we're talking about. And it is, you know, a matter of, and it's difficult, again, in that ESA context, to think about, are we managing for certain species, or are we managing more holistically? And again, working together, kind of collaboratively, I think we can get there, because that way you've got kind of the suite of things covered, if you will. And I think we're fortunate with the collaboration and the cooperation, and frankly, just even the attendance that we had here today of folks interested in making sure that we are working together to ensure that we're having those desired results. Let's see. So yes, working in partnerships is probably the best way to ensure that we're implementing good projects on the ground. And I think that's it.
All right, thanks, Jody. So I thought I would start out by acknowledging all of you, and I was surprised at one point looking at the spreadsheet that got sent out, all the people that were going to be here today. I was like, wow, I didn't know we'd get this much interest. But you step back and you think about it, we've got a lot of people, you know, and I tend to be biased in my thinking towards the federal side of things, and I know there's a lot of folks out here today that don't work for a federal agency, but you know, there's a lot of folks in the agencies here and trying to implement the Northwest Forest Plan, working on this issue of the aquatic realm, the aquatic ecosystem, consultation issues under ESA. But I wanted to kind of emphasize the importance of today in my mind, and I think everybody knew coming into this, and we've heard all day long that you know, there aren't any easy answers, and you know, I sort of think about science as not necessarily always in agreement, and there's always a hypothesis testing element to science, and there's always going to be different science, finding new things, finding new truths, if you will. But the important thing is that all of you are here today, and relationships among all of you, I think, are really important, and at different levels, both within your agency or whoever you're working for, and particularly among agencies. And we've heard some, Stan's last talk was very interesting in that it talked about people and politics and trust and interaction and behavior. Wow. And that is a big thing, but we all need to continue to work together, and this workshop is a good example. It was born out of a Service First grant, and a number of folks across agencies, you know, trying to pull this together and work collaboratively. And so I think relationships are important. These opportunities allow folks to do and learn as much stuff on the breaks as when you're standing up here. And relationships will endure beyond projects. It was very interesting for me. I particularly enjoyed when Tom Spies and Michael Pollack were up together, tag teaming the podium. That's a relationship that I thought was pretty cool. And I think all of you can relate to different relationships you've had with colleagues and trying to resolve some of these issues. I see some people acknowledging that. I thought I'd step back too. I think what strikes me is that we all have some shared interests here, whether we work for a land management agency, a regulatory agency. I think our shared interest is in recovery and conservation of not only listed salmonids, but all of the various species and critters that utilize the aquatic realm, and we heard a bunch of that today. And while we have these shared interests, we do need to acknowledge that oftentimes we have different thoughts about how to get there. And I think of sort of the difference between perhaps a passive management approach to getting to some of these things versus an active management approach. And, you know, both legitimate concepts, both trying to get to outcomes where we're restoring the aquatic world, we're restoring streams, we're restoring those aquatic areas, but different ways to get there. And those different ways to get there have different risks associated with them. So finally getting to sort of touching on the risk part, there's probably more inherent risk in the active management side of things. There's more things to be attentive to understand what it is you're doing and why you're doing it and where you're doing it and how much of it you should be doing in which areas. Versus a passive management, if you just want to look at it and go, well, I'm going to let it grow. And, you know, we saw some presentations today that kind of looked at some of this modeling of, you know, if you just let things grow versus if you get in there and do some things. And I think that creates a lot of challenges for us, particularly among agencies, action agencies versus regulatory agencies. And, you know, Jody touched on risk tolerance, and I did want to touch on risk tolerance as well, because I think that it drives a lot of our thinking, it drives a lot of our behavior, and it affects our relationships. And we need to continue to work together. We need to continue to try and build trust and continue to try and reconcile those differences in risk tolerance. And I think I'll just stop there and let Ken have a turn here.
Of course, always the challenge is when you go forth, everybody's said about everything. So ditto on all of that, and the rest of the day, you know, I've had a couple of conversations with people I've known for close to 20 years now throughout the day, you know, and this isn't a new topic to any of us. Usually we're all interested in it. We're interested in riparian. I remember when I came to this region in '94 for the Forest Service, work on watershed analysis. I can tell you our watershed analysis team, when posed with the question, do you want to work on the riparian module, we said, no. Our ranger wants it done by said date, and we don't have time to do that. There's no way we're going to get it done. And so we passed. And because all of what we're talking about was very clear to us, it's a difficult question. It's a tough one, and there's a lot that goes to it. Okay, fast forward, here we are 20 years later almost. We're talking about the same issues. We have more tools, we have more information, and that's always a really great thing. We heard a lot of great talks today. We have some of the best minds in our region working on this issue, talking to us today. Most of these people that were up here today, I've known for almost 20 years. I have great respect for all of them. And, you know, but what it comes down to is, you know, we're not doing work out in the cornfields of the Midwest where we can replicate, you know, this corn hybrid compared to that corn hybrid. It's not how it works. And I don't know how many times I heard today, you know, the comment or the word context. And you know, I almost felt like, you know, being in the audience again, you know, jotting down the number of ums I heard from the professor. I didn't do that. But as the day went on, I was going, context. Yeah, that really is it. I mean, it really does come down to the context, and that's why it's so difficult. Is each place on the landscape that we know, and we're represented by a really wide range of folks from all over, you know, Western Oregon. A few people from up on the peninsula, you know, and other locations. You know, when the question was hit with Tim Beachy about, you know, your fire return interval, you know, coming from Southwest Oregon, yeah, his fire return intervals didn't match up at all to my experience. Those aren't the fire return intervals we talked about down on the Tiller Ranger District. So it's complex. We've got a huge landscape that we're trying to deal with. I guess where I'm going to go with all this, and not be redundant, is I think Stan hit it really well on a lot of what he had to say about, you know, there is uncertainty with everything we do. I don't know how many people came here today expecting some sort of answer, that we're going to get the answer today on where we go. But that's just not going to happen. There's a lot of other factors involved here. I think one of the keys that was mentioned by a lot of us as managers is that relationships are important. We got to work on those relationships, and you don't do that in the most stressful situations. When deadlines are looming, you got to get it done, you got to get your targets. We got to get a consultation done from our standpoint. That's not when you build the relationship to start out with. You start out with going out, and we talked about it a bit. You go out and kick the dirt around, walk those streams, take a look. That's when you put it all into context. That's when you have a chance to look at it, say, where am I in this watershed? What is going on here? What is the objective we're trying to, if you don't have a clear objective in mind in that riparian area, then you're basically kind of lost. You're kind of throwing it out to the wind. So are you going to be right? Yeah, you know, the 95% confidence interval and getting 19 out of 20 times, you know, this is one grand experiment, that's for sure. But we have no choice. That's our life's ambition here is we love the forest, we love the woods, we love the aquatics. That's why we're here. That's why we all chose this profession. So, you know, I think, you know, my final thought here is just bottom line, build on those relationships, get out together and talk, and just have open communication. Certainly, you know, our best scientists, we heard them about a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, kind of similar presentations, kind of in their early stages. They've had a lot of talking going on. There's a lot of science out there, a lot of literature, and a lot of uncertainty, but, you know, they've built those relationships over time, and that's the only way we're going to move forward, too, is building those relationships so that we can build that word trust. And that's what it's going to come down to. Anyway, I've said enough. It's late.